How will it impact small businesses? So we have the first slide, Dory. Okay, yeah. Let's move on to the next slide. In this presentation, we will explore the effects of the changes in the exchange rate policy and how it will impact businesses. So let us begin. Most small business owners, everybody has heard about exchange rates. What is the exchange rate? Simply put, the exchange rate is Hello? Hello?
We can hear you now.
Yes,
okay.
I hear you.
Oh, okay. So I was saying that the exchange rate is basically the rate with which two currencies are exchanged for each other. It is the value of one currency expressed in terms of the other. So when you hear, for example, that the exchange rate of $1 is 500 naira, for instance, it means that a dollar is what a dollar will exchange for 500 naira. So 500 is the value of that dollar, but expressed in naira terms. So instead of saying $1, you say 500 naira when you're in Nigeria. So that's what the exchange rate is. It's the rate at which one currency changes with another, or the value of one currency expressed in terms of another. The most common currency with which most other currencies are measured is the United States dollar. The United States dollar is the most popular currency in the world. It is the currency with which most people carry out international trade. So for the purpose of this small presentation, all references to exchange rate will be with respect to Naira and dollar. There are two types of exchange rates. Generally speaking, you have a fixed or pegged exchange rate, and you have a floating exchange rate. A fixed rate is a system whereby the value of the currency is set by an authority, typically the central bank of a currency of a country would set a value and peg it to something. So the central bank could say, for instance, that no matter what, the Naira will exchange at so and so rate for $1. It doesn't matter what is happening, we'll find mechanisms to ensure that a dollar will exchange for 500 Naira. So they fixed it using the value of the dollar. Exchange rates can also be fixed using values of commodities like gold, but that's a separate whole conversation. So that's a pegged exchange rate. Now, in such regimes is where you would find them saying, oh, the official exchange rate is XYZ, but depending on whatever that official exchange rate is. Now, the other kind of exchange rate system is what you call a floating exchange rate, which is a system whereby the value of the currency is determined by the demand and supply of that currency in relation to another currency in the foreign exchange market. So basically, demand and supply will determine at what point, at what value the Naira will exchange it. So the government sort of, allows it does not remove the peg, so to say. The government removes the peg and says, okay, you know what, this is the real value of the currency. People have it. This is how much they will exchange for. And then the market determines, the rate at which it will go. Next slide, please. Now, when we talk of floating rates, we're talking of floating rates because that's the new kid on the block, so to say. That is what has been the talking point of the Nigerian business environment for the last few weeks. How exactly are we going to deal with it? What are the factors that affect these floating rates? There are many factors that affect floating rates. Three major ones I would like us to just focus on are one, demand and supply, as already stated earlier. So if, for example, for some reason, supply of dollars into an economy, say Nigeria, increases, maybe more people are exporting and earning in dollars, more people are investing in more foreigners are investing in Nigeria, and then there's an influx of dollars, it means that there'll be more dollars within the economy, and therefore what that will happen is that it will reduce the rate at which the dollar exchange is, because it has become less scarce, and vice versa. When it becomes more scarce, it increases the value at which a dollar will exchange for a naira. There are so many things that can affect demand and supply, increased exports, USD inflows, and all of that. The next thing is inflation. Of course, if there's the higher the more the inflation, the more expensive the dollar will become, because the value inflation is inflation basically defined as an increase in the price of goods and services without a requisite increase in income, for instance. So when the country is experiencing inflation, it also affects the exchange rate. Another one is political instability. If the political atmosphere is not stable, if foreigners cannot determine what is going to happen in a country, the business environment, it reduces their confidence, and then it reduces investments and all of that. And then there's a multiplying effect, which means that, of course, the supply of USD into the country will reduce, and then it affects exchange rates negatively. Next slide. So, implications of floating rates. One of the key implications of having a floating rate as opposed to a pegged rate is that the floating rate is very, very subject to market fluctuations. So whatever happens in the foreign exchange market, it will affect the rate at which you buy dollars. So you could have, say, a rate today being Monday, and then before you know it, on Wednesday, the rate has changed by a tremendous amount because of something that happened on Tuesday. Whereas with a fixed exchange rate, it is not necessarily so. So it goes to say that a rising or falling exchange rate could impact the cost of raw materials used by small businesses or any other cost, especially if your business is an import-export centered business. If you deal in goods or services that are imported, that volatility will affect such a business. So that's one thing that small business owners are very, very wary about. Like I said, when a rising rate increases cost, a falling rate will reduce cost. So it's not always doom and gloom. Sometimes it's the other way around. If you have an improved exchange rate, then it means that your cost will also reduce. And then you can either sell at a lower price and beat competition, or you can have increased margins. Next slide, please. Impact of floating exchange rates on small businesses in Nigeria. As said earlier, imports and exports oriented small businesses and businesses that generally rely on imported goods will see an increase in the cost of raw materials, because if you look at the trajectory now, since the announcement has been made, since the announcement was made, the rate has gone how much you are sourcing dollars to import. And then there's a likelihood that as your costs increase, you will transfer to the customer. So it makes it, increased prices now makes it harder to compete, especially if your competition is not import oriented, or if whatever you are dealing with has substitutes that can be, you have substitute competition, that source their own materials locally, and you are importing yours. It will make it more difficult for you to compete with them. Small businesses that export goods will see an increase in profits, however. So again, you would find that because of the same reason, if your business is, say you are in agro industry, and a lot of what you do, you export, you will find that a floating exchange rate, especially at this current time in Nigeria, would increase your profits, because you will be earning more dollars, for what you do. Price inflation. If the exchange rate fluctuates too drastically, inflation rates may increase, affecting the price of goods and services. Again, we discussed it in the previous slide that where inflation, where the volatility is very high, it could lead to inflation, and eventually it will affect price and goods of services in the market. There are risks, of course, that are attendant to exchange rates, exchange rate risks while making transactions. You may negotiate one thing at one rate, and then before you know what's happening, by the time you are supposed to deliver, the rate has changed. One area where this happens a lot is where people take foreign denominated loans. So you took a loan and you're supposed to repay the loan at a particular rate, and then by the time you are repaying the loan, the rate has changed, and because of the increased volatility, it makes such risks even more pronounced, and this could potentially lead in financial losses. Next slide, please. Now we come to the challenges and opportunities for small businesses. Yes, from what we've said so far, I mean, we would have already come to see that this whole floating rate scenario presents, unique its own challenges, but there are also some opportunities, and we also have strategies. Small businesses in Nigeria face obstacles in adapting to changes in exchanging rates, especially if they don't have the resources to hedge their risks. So when you say they don't have the resources to hedge their risks, there is something called hedging. I'm sure if you talk to your bankers, they would go more in depth on that. But adapting to that volatility, okay, for the foreseeable future, this is what the Naira or the dollar will be exchanging at. But now it's more volatile. So moving from that predictability to an unpredictable business environment is going to be very, very difficult for a small business. However, there are ways to look for opportunities in that kind of scenario by developing new innovative products or seeking new business partnerships. The second one is particularly important because sometimes you do not have the experience or expertise to deal with these situations, but there are companies or there are organizations or there are other businesses who are more experienced. So forging new partnerships with them could help one to see it through. Also, you could have different trade partners, do business trade partnerships with businesses who are providing substitutes for whatever you sell. So instead of dealing with people abroad, you can deal with people in Nigeria. It also presents an opportunity for people to go into new businesses that could cater to some of the things that people were looking for abroad. So those are some of the opportunities that small businesses can tap into. Typically, it will entail talking to a financial advisor, talking to a bank, for example, Keystone Bank. They have most banks, Keystone Bank, as an example, would have the resources to be able to advise small businesses on how to forge these partnerships. Strategies for survival. By investing in hedging strategies such as currency futures or forward contracts, small businesses can mitigate the risks associated with exchange rate fluctuations and prepare for any changes in markets. So now this issue of currency futures and forward contracts are a bit technical, especially for people who are not who do not have the expertise, to really understand what they are. Again, this is where financial institutions come in. In very simple terms, a futures is an exchange traded, is a contract that specifies the price at which a currency or two currencies will trade at a future date. So I don't want to go into all of that so that we don't derail from why exactly we're here. But futures and forwards are two means which you could two strategies for survival in times of volatility. Next slide, please. Solutions and strategies for currency fluctuations. We've already mentioned this, consulting financial advisors. Small businesses can consult financial advisors or subscribe to market intelligence services to stay informed about changes in exchange rates and potential risks. And this is very self-explanatory. Using technology, small businesses can use online tools and software to help them track and analyze data related to exchange rates and market changes. So, I mean, it's theoretically, yes, technology is one way to be able to manage these risks. But one thing I would say is that if you are not, if you do not have the requisite skills to be able to, if you do not know what you are doing, it will basically be useless to you. So it's also, except for people who have those skills, it's my advice would be to revert back to consulting financial advisors. Diversifying income streams. Yes, by diversifying their income streams, small businesses can reduce the risks associated with fluctuations in exchange rates. So basically what this is saying is that if your business is tailored in such a way that a great percentage of it is affected by exchange rate fluctuations or affected by the dollar rate, you might want to diversify your streams of income into some things to an area that is more local, so that your exposure to foreign exchange is reduced. If it's a small business that sources raw materials, like I said earlier, some raw materials have substitutes that can be sourced locally. Therefore, that way you are not exposed to some of these risks. Monitoring cash flows. Small businesses should monitor cash flows carefully to identify any potential risks, opportunities related to exchange rate fluctuations. I mean, this is normal for every business person. You will see when you are bleeding and you will see when you are not. So, and that would help you to, call for help as soon as the need arises, than wait for everything to blow up before you realize that, there's fire on the mountain. Next slide, please. Okay, so I just added some case studies for anybody who's interested in some other reading, of examples of people who have survived exchange rate fluctuations in the past. So I'm sure you'll get the slides at a later date, and you can on your own go through those case studies. Conclusions and recommendations. Next slide. So number one, stay informed. Number two, diversify. Number three, invest in hedging. Stay up to date on market news and developments. Don't wait to be the last person to know what's happening. If there's an announcement, be aware. Subscribe to magazines, read newspapers, follow the news, be attentive to what's going on in the environment. Talk to experts, who could advise one on what is oncoming, because sometimes we find that something may not have been announced. The opening remark made a mention of policies that have not been announced, the ones that are still yet, the policies that have been announced, and the ones that are yet to come. Sometimes the environment, for people who can read the environment, there are people who can say that, oh, from the way things are happening, we expect that the government will do X, Y, Z in the coming weeks. So therefore, it may be a good idea to do this right now so that you are not exposed. So keep all those channels of information open. If your bank has a newsletter, subscribe to their newsletter. Talk to your customer service, to your account officer as often as you can, and all of that. So stay informed. Diversification, basically diversify your income sources, expand into new markets to cushion the impact of currency fluctuations. If you've been dealing 100% in imported related, goods or services, whether your raw materials are imported or whether your, basically your raw materials are imported, try and either find substitute raw materials or go into slowly diversify into another line of business that does not depend on imports a lot. And at the same time, this would also be a good time to also diversify into lines of businesses that emphasize exports, because it's not just about reducing your cost, it's also about increasing your revenue. And then finally, invest in hedging. Invest in hedging strategies, talk to financial advisors, fixed contracts or forwards. They will reduce your risk exposure and they will protect yourself from the volatility of the market. Thank you very much. So I believe that that's the summary of the presentation.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Maleb, for this enlightening exposition. So before we go into the Q, there are already some questions in the chat, but before we go into Q&A, we will take a poll. So the organizers, the Keystone Bank team, have created a poll for everyone on the call. So I think this will be the time. Sylvia, you can share the poll online, and then we want to get your opinions about this very pressing and interesting subject matter. So yes. Okay, so you have, let's take a few, I think the poll is up now. So please, let's take a few minutes to respond to the poll. Thank you. Okay, I see we're gaining in participation. So out of 62 people on the call, we have 12 participants that have filled the poll. So let's just take another few minutes so everyone can participate. Okay, so we have 32 people that filled the poll. We're still waiting for, I think that's 63% participation. So this is very important. It comes from our sponsors. So please, we urge everyone to oblige us by filling this poll. Thank you. Oluranti Karu, you said we should share the poll. It's already shared. If you look at your screen, you can likely see it. Probably you're logging in with your phone, so you just have to explore your screens. It's popping up. If you're logged in with your laptop, then it'll be very clear what it is. Samuel Timilehin, are you?
So Glory, maybe you might tell them to pop it again. It's actually not showing again.
It's visible on my screen, so I don't think it's from. I don't think it's a problem. But Sylvia, please, can you confirm that the poll is still up?
Yes, the poll is still up.
It's still up, and I can see it on my screen. So.
Can you see it on your screen? No, okay.
Okay, yes, once you complete it, you won't see it again. So I can see a few people sent me messages that they've completed their poll. So they've completed their poll. So therefore, once you complete and click on end poll, then it goes away. So, all right. Okay, thank you. And Eniola Ogunlade just shared a tip. For those who cannot see it on their phones, go to the more icon and then you'll see the poll. So just go to click on more and then you'll see the poll. Thank you so much, Eniola. Okay, so I think we have 70% participation. Let's give a few more minutes. This poll is quite important. So I'd urge everyone to please fill. Okay, so we also have a few questions on the chat. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them to me, either as a direct message or you can put it on the chat and then we'll take it. Okay, so I think we have 82% participation in the poll. We'll just wait for 1 more minute. After that, we'll go into the question and answer section. Right, okay, so I think without further ado now, we'll go into the Q&A section. There are quite a few questions on the chat for the speaker. So I'll start with this. Number one, someone asked, how does the floating of the exchange rate impact the cost of imports for small businesses? And how does it affect their overall competitiveness? I'll take it again. How does the floating of the exchange rate impact the cost of imports for small businesses? And how does it affect their overall competitiveness?
Okay, thank you. So I would like to, hold on, just give me a minute. Okay, so the major issue with the floating exchange rate with respect to small businesses that are import-based is the volatility. Because when an exchange rate floats, what it basically means is that it will largely be determined by demand and supply, and anything can affect demand and supply. Sometimes even speculation can affect demand and supply. You know, some things that are not necessarily grounded in any financial fundamentals may affect demand and supply. So volatility becomes an issue. Today it's high, tomorrow is low, you know, and then to add to that, when it's getting high, there isn't any, or there is very little artificial intervention, you know, that the government will, or that the central bank would employ in controlling it. So if you are taking a position when the exchange rate was, say, 500, right? And as at maybe after a few months, maybe a month, it has gone up to, say, 900. Nobody is going to, and it's still going up. You are left exposed, you know. So that volatility is where the issue really is. And then, of course, it reflects, if your business is import-based, it reflects on the cost of your product, such that if you are lucky that by the time you import and your products come in, for instance, the rate has gone down, you would, because you have to sell, you would end up selling at a loss, because no customer, no consumer is going to purchase your products at a high price on the sentiment that this was how much it cost you to import them. Because there are other people who did not import at the same time as you, or who imported at a different rate, or who were lucky that they just got into the market now when the rate had gone down. And those people are your competition, and they will sell at rates that you cannot compete with. So you will be forced to sell at a loss. But like I always say, vice versa is also the case. It could happen the other way around, you know, where the rate fluctuation is in your favor. So to summarize, it's the major issues is volatility, and it can increase your costs somewhat indiscriminately, because like I said, there is no peg, there is nobody to say, you know what, we can't allow this thing go beyond 600, or we can't allow it go beyond 650. So when the rate is floating, you know, it makes it more difficult for businesses who are engaged in imports to plan, which is why, like we said earlier, you would now have to start looking at other options like other hedging options where you will have to talk to financial experts, people that have the technical know-how. How do I go about this? How can I purchase? How can I utilize the currency forward? How can I agree a rate today such that anything that happens in the future does not concern me? You know, let's lock a rate in today. If it goes up, if it comes down, I don't care. I would purchase at that rate, or I would do business at that rate. You know, you can enter into such a contract. What that kind of contract will do for you is that it will help you plan. So you know that no matter what, your forward contract says you are doing business at 600 naira to the dollar. So whether in the open market the dollar is going for 800, the person you enter that contract with has also built the risks of 600 into his own model. So it makes you more, it's better for your planning, you know. And I believe this is where the bankers of the business or financial advisors of the business could come in.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, John Paul, for that exposition. So moving on to the next question. What are the potential advantages and disadvantages of a floating exchange rate system for small businesses compared to fixed exchange rate system?
Well, there are a few. There are a few advantages. So, one. So let me start with the disadvantages, and then I'll go to the advantages. The first thing I would say is that the floating exchange rate, because we've spoken about disadvantages before, the floating exchange rate has the disadvantage of, well, let me say adverse volatility, right? Like we just discussed in the last exam, in answering the last question. Adverse volatility. Businesses don't like that volatility. So where the exchange rate is not pegged or fixed, you are exposed to whatever happens when there's a movement, especially if the movement is negative. Floating exchange rates are prone to fluctuations. They are volatile. Business people generally don't like it. If you are doing a stable business, you just don't like something that moves anyhow. And the period with which it moves is very short. It can be one thing today, it's another thing tomorrow, it's another thing next tomorrow. You know, so more so where, like I said, the things that affect its movement are not very predictable all the time. You know. Second thing is that it does not, floating exchange rates they take a long time to recover. So if the rate is, so from experience, you find that when it gets bad at a faster rate than it gets better. You know, and that also has a very bad impact for small businesses, because it means that you have very little time to adapt when it's getting bad, you know. But when it's getting better, you are being forced to sorry, you can't go in the same at the same speed. I don't know if I'm connecting. I'm trying to look for the right words to explain it. You know, it was just understand that it gets bad, and then when it gets bad, everybody, it's like, okay, let me use an analogy. Imagine in Nigeria, for example, when they say fuel price has increased. Once there's a whiff of a rumor that fuel price increases, if they were selling fuel at 100 naira before, immediately that same evening it will go to 200 naira. But when the news is the other way around, you know, it takes a longer time for it to normalize, to go back to the regular price. So something similar, you know, happens with exchange rates. floating rates. And then of course yeah, so those are two main advantages. Now those are two main disadvantages. For the advantages, the major advantage of floating rates for small business is that it doesn't,
Stability, and you can plan.
sorry? Hello? Someone said something.
Yeah, we're
Stability
trying
and
to
ability to plan. You said stability and ability to plan, yes.
So I can't hear you very well anymore.
You said stability and okay, you can just proceed. You
Okay.
can proceed.
So, and then for the peg rate, the peg rate gives you, it's not as volatile. So businesses you have a greater window to plan, to forecast, because you know that, oh, okay, our currency is pegged at XYZ rate. So even if it's going to change, it won't change so drastically, it won't change, so it gives that comfort, that businesses can plan with. That's a major advantage of the peg rate over the floating rate. So one is very volatile, one is not as volatile. And with the one which is volatile, planning is difficult. With the one which is not volatile, planning is a bit easier.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much, John Paul. Okay, so more questions coming in. So the next question is, just a minute. How does the floating exchange rates influence the pricing strategies of small businesses, particularly those engaged in international trade?
Well, it's pretty much what we've talked about before. How does it influence the pricing strategies? What it means is that for example, I remember we said something about financial advisory, going to, probably before, people were not small businesses who were just pricing based on cost. So I look at my cost, I set a margin, I put a price, and that's it. I know what my markup, what I want my markup to be. I implement it. My pricing has to do with, I just input output, very straightforward. You could do that with a floating rate, with a fixed rate, with a pegged rate. With a floating rate, it becomes more difficult to just do that. So the major impact it will have on your pricing strategy is that you will now have to, again, talk to experts. You will now have to, setting your prices, you would need to set prices based on your forwards or your futures, depending on, I'm trying to avoid using those words too much, but you would now have to price taking into consideration your locked-in prices, for your locked-in exchange rate, which you weren't doing before. You weren't doing that prior to when the exchange rate started floating. So that's a major difference, that it would definitely affect how you price. You can no longer rely on, oh, I bought this for X naira, and we exchange dollar was this when we bought it. Now I want to make 20%. We have 20%, that's my margin. It now becomes more difficult, because don't also forget that most businesses would sell, especially businesses that deal in goods as opposed to services. Most businesses would sell at replacement cost. So it's not just enough for you to say, oh, I will just add X amount to my cost and then I'll sell. No, you have to factor in that at the time that you are going to the market again to buy another set of raw materials or another set of goods, the dollar may have moved, or the exchange rate may have moved positively or negatively. So what are the signs? What direction do you think it will move in? Who will help me with that? And then when you have that, you can factor that into how you set prices today, because you know that in 1 or 2 months' time, the currency is likely to move in a certain direction. And these are things that you need a lot of financial advisory to do. So I think that businesses would that is the major way to affect their pricing strategy. You now have to be a lot more technical in how you price it.
Thank you. Okay, then we have a few more questions, but we're pressed for time, so we'll just take one more, and then for the other questions, probably we'll find a way to share this the recording and then the contact details of the speaker if you would like to get in touch for additional feedback. So lastly, are there any policy recommendations you make to the government to support small businesses in adapting to a floating exchange rate environment?
That's a tough question. Policy recommendations I would make to the government. So this is the way I see it. For now, right? And this may come as a surprise, but for now, my answer to my question is no. Because it is the answer to your question, sorry, is no. Because it is too early in the day for you to start. So the point is that if you've brought in a policy, there has to be you have to watch and see what the effect of that policy is before you can start talking about policy recommendations to help small businesses or not to. We don't know, bringing any policy recommendations to help small businesses now, in my opinion, is a bit like groping in the dark, because a policy is supposed to, address something. So this new floating exchange rate policy has not even been in place for 1 month, right? So we've not really seen what the impact has been. Now, I'm not saying we should wait for a year, but I don't think that I'm in a position to advise any policy recommendations to help any kind of business, whether small business, big business, large corporations, for now. It's been 2 or 3 weeks. So I think that we should still be in the stage of observing and gathering data. And then based on what we observe and what the data we gather, you can now design policies to help or assist, any group of businesses that you want to. But to say, I've read some things in the papers where people have said, no, the government should do this. It should be people have given different recommendations. But for me, I think that those recommendations I understand the mentality behind it. It's a bit, they are being proactive. But for me, I would say it's even too early to be proactive. Look at it for a month, look at it for 2 months. And then based on, what you've been able to gather, you can now, bring in a policy recommendation to manage, or to help, based on. But to just say, government should do this, it will be, for me, it's too early for that. So I would simply say no. Let's watch and see for a few more weeks before we start talking about policy recommendations.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. John Paul Maleb, for answering these questions and for the great presentation. So it was a pleasure to have you with us. On a final note, we'd like to give a warm appreciation to our sponsors, Keystone Bank. I would like to encourage from the call, a significant amount of us on the call don't have a business account with Keystone Bank. There are so many advantages to opening an account with Keystone Bank. So you're all urged to begin your business relationship with the bank today, so that you have access to information such as this, as well as a lot of other value-added benefits. So once again, I would like to thank our sponsors. This concludes our webinar. Please don't forget that we have day 2 coming up tomorrow, where we'll be addressing the impact of the removal of the fuel subsidy on SMEs. So we expect to see everyone here, and don't just come alone, tell a friend. Thank you all for attending. We hope you learned a lot and enjoyed this presentation. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.